by Canadian. To start with, let's take a look at the Canadian political system. Now I'm going to warn you in advance, this is not the most exciting content. There's a lot of terms being explained in this video, but fret not. I'll have two more videos up before the election, one on the history of the 6 major federal parties, and the second on the candidates for the upcoming federal election and their platforms. But first, how does this Canadian political system work? I'm glad you asked, Mac. Canada functions within a framework of a parliamentary democracy and a federal system of parliamentary government with strong democratic traditions. I know that's a mouthful, but let's break it down to 3 parts. 1, parliamentary democracy. 2, federal system. And 3, parliamentary government. A parliamentary democracy means a form of government where the head of the government derives their democratic legitimacy from their ability to command the support or confidence of a majority of the legislature to which they're held accountable. This head of government is usually, but not always, distinct from the ceremonial head of state. In our parliamentary democracy, Mark Carney is the new head of government, replacing Justin Trudeau, and King Charles III is the head of state. This system is different from the presidential system in that a president is not fully accountable to the legislature and cannot be replaced by a simple majority vote. This is why Vice President Kamala Harris could not replace former President Joe Biden the same way Prime Minister Mark Carney replaced former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Comparing U.S. and Canadian politics doesn't work. It's a losing battle. A federation or federal state is an entity characterized by a union of partially self-governing provinces, states, or other regions under a federal government. In a federation, the self-governing status of the states or provinces, as well as the division of power between them and the central government, is constitutionally entrenched and may not be altered by a unilateral decision, neither by the states or the provinces, nor the federal political body without the constitutional amendment. So essentially what this means is that a federation is a system where there's smaller governing bodies like provinces for us and states for Americans, as well as overarching federal governments. The provincial or state powers, as well as the federal powers, are set and cannot be changed by one or the other without constitutional amendment that have set powers. Sovereign power is formally divided between central authority and a number of constituent regions so that each region maintains some degree of control over its internal affairs. The Constitution of Canada can be amended by following a procedure outlined in the Constitution Act of 1982 known as the 750 Formula. So how does the 750 Formula work? It's 4 steps. So the House of Commons and the Senate must pass identical resolutions. Then at least 7 provincial legislative assemblies must pass identical resolutions. And then these 7 assemblies must represent at least 50% of the total population of provinces. And lastly, the Governor General has to issue a proclamation to formalize the amendment. Some examples are BC 38 here in Canada and the Civil Rights Amendment in the States. Finally, Canada's parliamentary government is seated at Parliament Hill in Ottawa and is composed of 3 parts: the King, or Queen sometimes, the Senate, and the House of Commons. Now, the House of Commons is usually dominant, with the Senate rarely opposing its will. The Senate reviews legislation and may initiate certain bills, while the King or monarch, who's represented by the Governor General here, gives royal assent to make bills into law. Royal assent is the way by which a monarch formally approves an act of legislature. It's a ceremonial formality, and we could have revolted and avoided all this, but then we'd be America. Yeah. Anyways, the Governor General, on behalf of the monarch, summons and appoints 105 senators chosen on advice of the Prime Minister. Advice in this case means a binding instruction given by one constitutional officer of state to another. The House of Commons is comprised of 338 members, called Members of Parliament, or MPs, and each member of Parliament represents an electoral district or riding. The Governor General also summons and calls together the House of Commons and may prorogue or dissolve Parliament to either end a parliamentary session or call a general election. What the hell does prorogue mean? Well, prorogation of Parliament is a termination of a session, usually done to terminate business, releasing all members from parliamentary duties until Parliament is next summoned. During a prorogation, bills that haven't received royal assent are entirely terminated and must be reintroduced as if they've never existed in the first session. Now, the House of Commons, but not the Senate, can be dissolved at any time by the King or Queen of Canada. As of now, that's King Charles. That's April 2025, but I'm not sure how long it's going to last. Or the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister. If confidence or supply is refused by the government, the Prime Minister must either resign or permit another member of the House of Commons to form a government, or else advise the Governor General to dissolve Parliament. But what's that phrase, a motion of no confidence, mean? Well, Mac, I'm glad you asked. A motion or vote of no confidence, or the inverse, a motion and corresponding vote of confidence, is a motion and corresponding vote thereon in a deliberative assembly, usually a legislative body, as to whether an officer, typically an executive, is deemed fit to continue and to occupy their office. The no confidence vote is a defining constitutional element of a parliamentary system in which the government or executive's mandate rests upon the continued support, or at least non-opposition, of the majority of the legislature. Loss of supply occurs when a government in a parliamentary democracy using the Westminster system, or a system derived from it, is denied the supply of treasury or exchequer funds by whichever house or houses of parliament or head of state is constitutionally entitled to grant and deny supply. A defeat on a budgetary vote is one way by which supply can be denied. Loss of supply is typically interpreted as an indicating a loss of confidence in the government. When a loss of supply occurs, the Prime Minister is generally required either by constitutional convention or by explicit constitutional instruction to either resign immediately or seek a parliamentary dissolution. The Governor General also delivers the throne speech at the opening of each new parliament. The monarch occasionally has done so instead of the Governor General when visiting Canada. Canada is a full democracy, and we follow a tradition of secular liberalism and egalitarian, moderate political ideology. Full democracies are countries where civil liberties and fundamental political freedoms are not only respected but also reinforced by a political culture conducive to the thriving democratic principles. This would include things like a functioning justice system and government and a diverse free media. These nations only have limited problems in democratic functioning. Examples are Canada, Denmark, Germany, Spain, UK, Australia, and Japan. Flawed democracies are countries where elections are fair and free basic civil liberties are honored, but may have issues like suppression of media and political opposition, but only on a minor scale. These countries have significant faults in other democratic aspects, including underdeveloped political culture, low levels of participation in politics, and issues in the functioning of governments. Examples are USA, Poland, Argentina, Jamaica, South Africa, India, Israel, and Ghana. Hybrid regimes are countries with regular electoral frauds preventing them from being fair and free democracies. These countries commonly have governments that apply pressure on political opposition, face widespread corruption, harassment, and pressure placed on the media, and more pronounced faults than flawed democracies in the realms of underdeveloped political culture, low levels of participation in politics, and issues in the functioning of governance. Examples are Kenya, Mexico, Tanzania, Armenia, Turkey, Peru, and Uganda. Authoritarian regimes are countries where political pluralism is non-existent and severely limited. These nations are often absolute monarchies or dictatorships. They may have some conventional institutions of democracy, but with meager significance. Abuses of civil liberties are commonplace. Elections, if they take place, are not fair or free. These include sham elections. The media is often state-owned or controlled by groups associated with the ruling regime. And no, this does not mean CBC. This means all consumable media is controlled. The judiciary is not independent, and censorship and suppression of government criticism are commonplace. Examples are Russia, Cuba, China, North Korea, Vietnam, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Palestine. Now, while some of these countries independently arrive at hybrid regimes or authoritarian regimes, it's important to note that other countries are prevented from achieving full democracies due to the actions of countries that have reached that level of governance through exploitation and global hierarchies and proxy wars and colonization. Now, secular liberalism is not a liberal thing. It's a form of liberalism in which secularist principles and values and sometimes non-religious ethics are especially emphasized. It supports the separation of religion and state, and secular liberals are usually advocates of liberal democracy and the open society as models for organizing stable and peaceful societies. Secular liberalism is often associated with stances in favor of social equality and political freedoms. Now, secular liberals advocate separation of church and state, like I just said, in the formal, constitutional, and legal sense, and it's common for secular liberals to advocate the teaching of religion as a historical and cultural phenomenon, opposed to religious indoctrination or lessons which promote religion as a fact in schools. Egalitarianism is a school of thought within political philosophy that builds on the concept of social equality, prioritizing it for all people. Egalitarian doctrines are generally recognized by the idea that humans are equal in fundamental worth or moral status. As such, all people should be accorded equal rights and treatment under the law. Egalitarian doctrines have supported many modern social movements, including the Enlightenment, feminism, civil rights, and international human rights. So one key aspect of egalitarianism is its emphasis on the equal opportunities for all individuals, regardless of their background or circumstances. This means ensuring that everyone has access to the same resources, education, and opportunities to succeed in life. And by promoting equal opportunities, egalitarianism aims to level the playing field and reduce disparities that result from social inequalities. Now, the moderate part is an ideological category which entails centrist views on the liberal-conservative spectrum. It may also designate a rejection of radical or extremist views, especially in regard to politics and religion. Peace, order, and good government, alongside an implied Bill of Rights, are the founding principles of the Canadian government. An emphasis on multiculturalism and social justice has also been a distinguished element of Canada's political culture. Canada's placed an emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion for all its people. Now, the biggest difference between us and our neighbors to the south is our political system. America employs a two-party system, while Canada has a multi-party system. A multi-party system encourages the general constituency, us, to form multiple distinct, officially recognized groups or political parties. Each party then competes for votes from the enfranchised constituents, those that are able to vote. So here's our Canadian voting history. This is going to be long. That's what she said. In Canada, white men always had the right to vote. So I guess you could just say starting in 1867, white men had the right to vote. But moving forward from there, Manitoba became the first province in which women gained the right to vote in 1916. And in September 14th, 1917, the Military Voters Act from World War I gave the vote to all soldiers, even non-citizens, with the exception of Indigenous soldiers, and to women serving as nurses or clerks from the armed forces, but rather than votes for specific candidates, these were just votes for or against the government. September 20th, 1917, another act was enacted. This was the Federal War Times Act, and this gave voting rights to women with relatives fighting overseas. It also stripped voting rights from anyone born in a country that was an enemy of Canada before 1902, deeming them enemy aliens. In 1919, women gained the right to run for federal office. In 1940, Quebec became the last province where women's rights to vote was recognized. In 1947, racial exclusions against Chinese and Indonesian and Canadian voters were lifted. In 1960, the right to vote was granted unconditionally to all First Nations groups. Previously, they could only vote by giving up status as First Nations people. In 1982, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guaranteed that all adult citizens had the right to vote. In 1988, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that mentally ill patients had the right to vote. And in 2002, prisoners were given the right to vote in their specific riding that they were in prison. And yeah, I mean, that's how democracy works. All adult Canadians, except the chief and deputy electoral officers, due to conflict of interest, of course, can vote in Canada. See, now driving is a privilege, right? But voting is a right, right? Now you may be wondering, I always learned that women gained the right to vote in Canada with the famous five, Henrietta Edwards, Nellie McClung, Louis McKinney, Emily Murphy, Irene Palby, the gals. That is actually not true. Now, these women were instrumental, but they were instrumental in women holding Senate positions. Now, if you don't know about the Persons case, it involved the aforementioned five women petitioning the Governor General to appoint a woman to the Supreme Court of Canada on August 27, 1927. In response, the Canadian government referred the following question to the Supreme Court. Does the word persons in Section 24 of the British North America Act of 1867 include women in its definition of persons? On April 28, 1928, the Supreme Court held that women were not qualified persons within the meaning of Section 24 in the British North America Act. This ruling was based on the premise that the term should be interpreted the way it was written in 1867, and if the Act mentioned women, that would have been specifically pointed out if they had meant to make an exception for women in the Senate. The famous five then appealed the decision of the Supreme Court with the Judicial Committee allowing the appeal and overturning of the decision, concluding that the term persons does include women, and the women are eligible to be summoned to and become members of the Senate of Canada. John Sankey, who delivered the judgment, was quoted as saying, "The exclusion of women from all public offices is a relic of days more barbarous than ours." Something like that. Finally, our electoral system is the first past the post system, which means the voters select the representative nominated for their electoral district or riding, and the candidate with the most votes, well, more than any other candidate, is elected to the seat in the 343-member House of Commons. That member represents that specific riding as Member of Parliament or MP. The party that wins the most seats in the House of Commons usually forms the government, with that party's leader becoming Prime Minister. Now, the largest party seat count that is not the government or part of the governing coalition becomes the official opposition. That party receives more finances and privileges than any other opposition party. Although we have a multi-party system, we have only federally voted in Liberals and whoever their opponents, who are the Progressive Conservatives today, into power. Sometimes I think that if other parties had a legitimate chance of winning, there'd be more pressure on governments to follow through on their promises, but enough of me yapping. Why did I say whoever their opponents are?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Mac.
Move over, man. Can you shift over a bit? God damn. I'm gonna tell mom. I'm gonna tell mom. I'll tell mom. The Progressive Party is younger than Jenna Ortega and Anneli Chapa. No, I'm serious. They're pretty new in the grand scheme of things. So how did we get here? Stay tuned for the next video in this series leading up to the federal election on April 28th, highlighting the history of each party and the final video outlining each candidate and the platform going into the election. Stop interrupting me. I'm talking. Jeez. Check out this video on the past liberal leadership election. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more content and comment if you can to help out with the algorithm. Vote and buy Canadian.